Nigeria's economy is on a level of 1 to 10, facing the pandemic and the oil price crash?
Yeah, so I think it's important to emphasize the fact that as a country, we're not very good with planning forward. So we tend to wait and hope and pray. And then when we now are faced with the reality of the challenges, we're doing firefighting. And most time, because we're doing those firefightings without proper structures and institutional framework, you find a lot of the decisions are not evidence-based, and therefore they do not accomplish the right results that you would want. I'd like to also state that even before COVID-19, the Nigerian economy was struggling. High unemployment rate, low revenue base, high deficits, growing debt. So these issues had been there even before COVID-19. So therefore, COVID-19 only just amplified the problems we've had economically. So if I must answer your question around the scale of 1 to 10, I'll say before COVID-19, maybe we were at 5. And now that we have COVID-19 in our present situation, I'll say we are probably at about 2 or 3. So it's a very difficult time. And there are no easy solutions or easy answers to them, just that there are some answers cannot work. So at least you can start ruling out the things cannot work and focus on the few that are likely to give you the results you're looking for.
Okay, I did read what came out from the budget office of the Federation sometime last week. I think they had a dialogue. I was part of it. So they sent, some of the things that the budget office did say last week, that the decline in estimated net oil and gas revenue available for Federation account, that's fact distribution, by 80% from 5.47 trillion to 1.12 trillion naira. Now, we are actually also going to, in terms of the revenues that the government expects to get from what the budget office has put together. That means I'm seeing drastic decreases around revenue. For example, stamp duty collections reducing to about 200 billion from 464 billion. Reduction in signature bonuses and renewals from 939 billion to about 350 billion naira. Reduction in MDA's capital expenditures from 1.564 trillion naira to 1.25 trillion naira. My question is then, how much do we need oil to be selling at right now to balance the budget? This morning, oil is selling around $33 a barrel. Don't forget that our own sweet crude, which is our Moneyline, is, at least, was it last week or so, it was even trading around 15 to 17 US dollars. There's also the cost of production of our oil. I don't know even who determines that. But how much do we need oil to sell for right now for us to balance our budget?
Yeah, so Nigeria's cost of producing oil is very much higher than many other countries. So Saudi Arabia, for example, would be fine at, maybe cost of production is around $4 per barrel. For Nigeria, it's somewhere between $17 to $22 per barrel. And this essentially makes it very difficult for us to make money when the price of oil is as low as 25 or even 30. So I would say, for us to balance the budget, we need to bear in mind that the size of the budget, even the second revision that we have, is still about 10.5 trillion, not very different from the original budget we had before COVID-19. And in that original budget, our benchmark was $57, and we still had a budget deficit. So if you are thinking about balancing the budget, you're talking about oil being in the region of $80 to $100. So, and that won't happen. There's no miracle that will make the price of crude oil go back to $80 or $100 on a sustainable basis before the end of the year. So which means Nigeria cannot balance its budget relying on crude oil in this year, 2020. So what that means is we have to then consider other options that are available to us. And I also need to mention that maybe the priority for us in fighting this pandemic is really balancing the budget, because even developed countries, many of the most developed countries in the world, from the US, to Italy, to a few other countries, are also raising their debt, and it's expected that deficit will balloon this year because governments need that to be able to deal with the crisis and fight off the pandemic. So in simple words, we need oil to be at about $100 to balance the budget. It is not likely to happen. Therefore, we must consider other options.
So what is that telling us? Is Nigeria about to go broke? If we take a look at some of the analysis, some of the assumptions, assumptions have gone outside the window, definitely, with the pandemic and the oil price crash. With some of the things you're seeing, our excess crude account at around 72 million US dollars. We're seeing our foreign reserves at around $33 billion, though the governor of the central bank have said that people that bring in their money, they can easily take it away, and all. He tried to assure investors, was it last week or some days ago? But with this, is Nigeria about to go broke? Is a revenue time bomb loading?
Yeah, I think maybe we should say Nigeria is broke already. The only reason why
I didn't want to raise alarm.
No, Nigeria is broke. We do not have our own money to spend. So the only reason why a country is different from an individual is you can borrow and you can also print money at some point. So technically, Nigeria does not have its own money to spend. We are relying on borrowing and all of that. So having said that, the point is, when you are in a crisis situation like this, you want to be careful the actions you take, the words you speak, and how you speak them. So people are watching what you say, as well as your body language and your actions as well. So I think it's a good thing that the central bank is giving that assurance, but the central bank needs to back up those words with their actions. What tends to happen is when you can give investors the confidence, then the problem would not even arise in the first place. There was a time in Europe, in the EU, and that they were having their own financial crisis. And then the ECB, the central bank for the EU, just came and said, we will unconditionally, the key word was unconditionally, we will unconditionally guarantee the debt of all the countries within the EU. And lo and behold, they didn't have to spend €1 and the problem went away because investors just wanted that confidence. So if Nigeria can provide the confidence in words and in actions, then we'll have less problem with exchange rates. But that doesn't solve our revenue problem, because the revenue problem is also a consequence of the lower price of oil, but also more importantly, the reduced economic activities as a result of the actions that are being taken by government in response to COVID-19. So we have to think about this holistically and come up with a joined up strategy that addresses one problem without creating another one or a bigger problem in the process.
You did mention earlier about, of course, we were in a crisis even before the pandemic, talking about, fiscal challenges and all of that. And you did mention earlier on firefighting mechanisms that may, even create greater problems for us at this time. What kind of, taking a look at the firefighting mechanisms we've put at least in the last few weeks, are you satisfied with those mechanisms? What would you like to see?
Yeah, so I need to commend, the economic managers who are trying to put all these responses together. I do not want to underestimate the amount of work and the efforts that have gone into them. So I'll commend them for what they have done so far. But of course, I'm going to say there's a lot more that we need to do. Some of the things I'd like to see, number one, is data and evidence-based decision. I'd like for us to make decisions based on data. On one hand, you need to bear in mind that you cannot do and you shouldn't do everything that people want or ask you to do. Otherwise, you will not have a country. For example, people don't want to pay taxes and they want government to give them cash in their pockets. So the question is, how do you even balance those two extremes? So you have to then, listen to the people, but then make decisions based on evidence and data. That's number one. Number two is coordination. I'd like to see more coordination between agencies of the federal government, between arms of government and then between levels of government. So states should work with federal government, with local government, National Assembly with the executive to work with all the agencies of government. This is a national problem, and we have to solve it and approach it in terms of the solutions we create in that manner, with that mindset. Otherwise, you may find that we are pulling in different directions, and people can inadvertently be complicating the problems, even though they have good intentions, because their own lenses is very narrow, and they see the problem from their own point of view alone without the broader perspective. So that coordination is important. And I think the next one is collaboration. So this will now extend beyond government to the private sector, international community, civil society. Let's come together. There's a lot of resources and capacity, for example, within the private sector. And one of the things I recommended is, why don't we have a coalition of the organized private sector, where you have the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, the Chambers of Commerce, you have the NESD, you have, all of them coming together to say, as the organized private sector, we want to understand the problems and how we can help, such that even when you want to do interventions and palliatives, government can have to focus on those who are most vulnerable. Even government resources are very limited, such that we direct those resources to where they're most needed and where they will make the most impact.
I think that's also a valid point. Instead of what we're seeing, pockets of different interventions in different places, isn't it? That's what you're talking about, the coordination and the collaboration. If we take a look at the economy, the IMF has predicted that Nigeria's economy will contract 3.4% this year from about, I think, 2.2% growth in 2019. How much contraction can the country withstand right now, bearing in mind that we have a lot of problems? We do have a lot of problems. Nigeria is still the poverty capital of the world. We control about 15% of the world's poor at this point in time. So how much contraction can we withstand so that things are falling apart already, according to Chinua Achebe, so that the hole is not too deep?
Yes. So the IMF, I think the IMF was actually maybe too optimistic. And maybe in fairness to them at the time, they got the data also from Nigeria, I think from MBS, about the forecast of about 3.4 decline in GDP. That has since been revised by Nigeria to, I think, around 4.5, minus 4.5. Some of us are saying that we need to do everything we can and do so very quickly to ensure that that decline is not even deeper than that. Now, to the question about how much can we afford at this time, I'll say, we can't afford anything. What we need to do is to make sure that this decline and this economic recession is not very deep and it's not prolonged, because many of our people can't even stand, a couple of days. Think about it. Many developed countries, because of their financial muscles, are actually putting cash into people's pockets and crediting their bank account so they can get by on a day-to-day basis. Nigeria has no resources to be able to do anything close to what we need to do. What federal government is doing at best is trying to take care of maybe 2 million, Nigerians, and you have over 100 million that need help. Plus, we also don't have the data to ensure that when you're trying to administer those palliatives, they don't end up in the pockets of, corrupt people, politicians, and brokers who are trying to make money for themselves. So these are some of the challenges we have that make our situation more complicated. So therefore, the most viable option and the most effective option to solve the problem is to get people back to work as quickly as possible so they can take care of themselves. And this, again, is another area where you need data for government to know suffering now, what are they suffering from, and what can we do to help them, and then make those interventions as quickly as possible. We have over 40 million MSMEs, for example, in Nigeria. a lot of them are not in business anymore because they just can't continue. But you need to ensure that these people don't get out of business permanently. What can we do such that as we ease the lockdown, those people can also ease back into work and begin to do their employment to keep their family and loved ones, the livelihood of their family and the loved ones, and also to employ people, one or two here, before you know it, it adds up. So I think for Nigeria, the biggest component of what we have to look at to ensure that we have, reduce the impact of this pandemic is number one, the MSME. Number two, I would say is agriculture, so that we have the food we need to eat. And number three is healthcare, because there are loads of people who at this point have medical challenges that's not related to COVID-19, but all our resources and the limited capacity we have has now been channeled towards COVID-19, such that people may be dying of other diseases and nobody is recording them. We know that Nigeria, even before COVID-19, we used to lose about 300,000 people in a year just to malaria alone. I'm not saying that it's okay for us to die, but if you think about it, COVID is not even anywhere as deadly as malaria for Nigeria. So we still need to make sure that healthcare is still being, taken care of in a way that addresses all ailments and diseases, not only COVID-19.
You've made a very valid and a very salient point there, in terms of even lives and livelihoods at this time, because one will wonder even what the president will come up with later today. As you are nudging that the economy should reopen and people should go back to their businesses so that perhaps the recession should not be as deep as possible, what kind of precautions should we put in place? Because as people go back to work also, we are also susceptible for COVID-19 to spread. We've not even seen the flattening of the curve, this first wave of infections. Some other economies are also talking about second wave of infection. We've not even seen the tip of this infection yet in the country. So how do we balance that out?
Yeah, I think there are a few points that are very critical in terms of, we know that locking down the economy is not sustainable. In fact, we are likely to lose more people because they won't have any means of livelihood, and their immunity would also be suppressed. We know that there's no cure for COVID-19 yet, so the best cure anybody can have is your immunity. And if you don't have the food to eat, you can't go around with your daily activities, your immune system is compromised, and therefore you're even more susceptible to even die from anything, not even COVID-19, from maybe even just malaria. So this is critical. So one way to deal with that, and this is also based on my own, just experience of the Nigerian system, is that I think that our biggest problem as of today is ignorance. So our people don't just understand what we're talking about. So they will tell you they know about COVID-19, but then ordinary just not touching your face, your nose when you wear your face mask, this how to wear it, wash your hand, use sanitizers. People don't understand, or maybe they can't be bothered. So I think it's important for us, the National Orientation Agency, Ministry of Finance, organized private sector, civil society, everyone in all languages, in dialect, not the Queen's English we speak in Abuja and Lagos. We need to connect with our people. Take this like we are doing a campaign to win the presidential election. That level of commitment we normally see during elections, that's the same commitment we need to put into this. Talk to market women, market men, Okada riders. Why didn't we have an agreement with bus riders before we start? We reeled out the rules, but they just didn't understand. So they went on with their business as usual. So that education is key. So once you've done that, I think the rest of it is within control. What we don't want is an outbreak that will be out of control. Nobody is expecting that COVID-19 will go away in the next 2 days, but let's not have an outbreak that will overwhelm, because we're already overwhelmed in a way. And then from the angle of the economy also, a bit of education as well for corporates, for organizations, for employers, for everybody that has a role to play, including government, in playing their roles and playing those roles effectively, and then getting feedback from time to time to adapt and review the rules, update them to make sure they're still fit for purpose.
You did also talk about, you've been talking about data At least you've mentioned it a couple of times. What data are you looking at that we should be churning out right now? What data should we rely on as we move on? Because like I always say, what you can't measure, you can't manage. And in Nigeria, we really do not even have, you know, that kind of data planning, that is planning alongside data. Though we know what the NBS is doing on its own part. Like last week, they released, I think, the consumption expenditure report, poverty report after like a year and all of that. But what kind of data are you expecting to see, and what kind of data should government be basing its planning right now on?
Yeah. So again, I need to commend the NBS. They're doing a very good job under very difficult circumstances. Of course, we'll keep to ask for more. But in terms of data for planning and in responding to COVID-19, there are two dimensions to it. One is, with the existing data we have, how can we connect the dots? And in connecting the dots, I'm talking about, for example, you have BVN. You have data around phone registration, almost every adult. In fact, even people who are not adults, including those who are educated and illiterate and everyone, almost everyone that you want to get something about in Nigeria has a mobile phone. They might not be using a smartphone, but they're connected. So we have that data. Then you have data to do with tax registration, with state authorities, with FRS. You also have data to do with other organizations. Some of them are trade associations. Some of them are with government like SMEDAN and NASME about the SMEs. And of course, you have the data with the MBS. You have data with FRS. You have data with Joint Task Board. You have data with, INEC. For voters registration. So the question is, what can we do to quickly connect the dots so that these data can handshake and we can know where the problems are, identify those who are most vulnerable, and how can you intervene without making your little intervention go to the wrong places? That is where data comes in. And now the second dimension to this data issue is, this cliche about do not waste a crisis. Are we using the opportunity of this crisis to gather new and reliable data? This is the time, for example, that I can say to you that I've identified you as a poor person, for example, based on your consumption of data and voice on your mobile phone, which is a good indicator of whether you're poor or not. And on that basis, I want to give you 5,000 naira or 10,000, but I need you to register with the tax authority. I need you to get a national identification number, NIN. And then we can also say to ourselves, we've been wondering about these, mobile money and using telecommunication to promote financial inclusion, like what you have in Kenya under M-Pesa. And we not use this opportunity to promote that because people can't go physically to banks. We've seen what has happened in places like Lagos, where there's a crowd just trying to use the ATM. If you have mobile money working effectively in Nigeria, that will be completely irrelevant and unnecessary. We can use this opportunity to promote those. We can even use palliative on mobile phones. You get the credit alert on your phone, and you can turn it to, maybe a food stamp, or you can cash it out if you want, or you can use it to buy things directly without cashing the money out. So this is what I mean. So data is at the heart of how we manage this crisis. Countries where they have reliable data, the Americans don't have to worry about data. They just use your social security number and you get credit to your IRS numbers. So we need to get to that point. I know it will not happen immediately, but we need to commence that journey as a result of this crisis.
Can we commence that journey if we do not have enough money as we do right now? Can you hear me, Mr. Oyedele? Okay.
No, we're increased to about 5.3 trillion naira. So we do not have money, but we're spending money. So the question.
Okay, you know what?
The question is, you need to spend it and make sure that it brings you the best results.
Okay, Mr. Oyedele, what you actually said, I didn't hear because the network wasn't that strong. Let me ask it again. Where does the money come from to do all of this? I didn't get you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the reality is that you need to think about, first, how can you cut waste? Because you're trying to make money. One big area is subsidies. So part of the subsidies on fuel products have been removed, particularly under recovery, removed itself. And then the exchange rate subsidy has been removed at least to some point. But then the tax subsidy hasn't been removed. There's a tax subsidy on fuel products. Of course, you also have electricity subsidy, somewhere around 1 trillion. The fact of the matter is that poorest people who live below poverty line don't even have the luxury of electricity. And when they do, the number of Nigerians that have a TV in their homes and fridges are less than 25%. So those subsidies are not going to the poorest people. Government can remove that, and that saves money. And of course, you have things like, pilgrimage. I know nobody is going to Mecca or Jerusalem now, but that's an agency that you need to immediately close down. And then you have to ensure that all the areas where we have wastage within our budget and our government system has to be eliminated. Once you've done that, the other areas you need to look at is, can you sell assets that are not productive? We call them dead capital.
Okay, Mr. Oyedele, are you still there? I think we should just take a break. Let's try as much as possible to reconnect with Mr. Taiwo Oyedele of PricewaterhouseCoopers as we move into... Oh, Mr. Oyedele, let's take a break. Let's try to reconnect you because the network is freezing. So I didn't get to hear what you said towards the end of that conversation. Let's quickly take a break. We'll be right back. But don't forget, join us on all our social media platforms. We are there right now. Follow the show, Moneyline TV on Twitter. You can also find and follow me right now at Nancy Lo. Yes, I'm talking to you. You watching me. Yes, we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Mr. Taiwo Oyedele is still speaking with me. Mr. Taiwo, okay, good to see you again now. I hope that the network doesn't misbehave anymore because it's still part of, like I say, what we're seeing right now is the side effects of technology, especially here in Nigeria. That's another kettle of fish which we need to look at another day. Okay, from what you said earlier, where do you stand on the implementation of the Orosoye report? Because you were talking about earlier why we should have agencies that conduct pilgrimages, whether it's Christian pilgrimage or Muslim pilgrimage at this time. The government shouldn't be bankrolling that. If you want to go on a pilgrimage to Israel or to Saudi Arabia, fund yourself, isn't it? So where do you stand on the Orosoye report? I know that those agencies, if they are listening to me now, they want to cut off my head. But this is something we need to say.
Yeah, indeed. We need to say that. The other point I was trying to make before the network started misbehaving was the point about, even in terms of how we spend the little money we're able to raise, including borrowing, is to say, why are we spending our limited resources on, building ports and railways? These are commercially viable projects that the private sector can execute, including power generation. So government doesn't have to spend its hard-earned and borrowed money on those, and you can free it and create the fiscal space for other very important interventions, particularly human capital around education and healthcare, as well as palliatives. Now, to your point around, Orosoye report, again, I made that point about the cliche around do not waste a crisis. We've always had that report, I think now for about 6 years. But as a country where this fire brigade approach has always been there with us, we don't look at issues until there's a need, and sometimes an urgent need. But in any case, they say better late than never. These crises present an opportunity. that when you make decisions now, the vast majority of Nigerians that will be on the street protesting will not, because now they seem to understand that you need to make those decisions. We should not allow those opportunities to pass by. Some of it will require that you change even the constitution. Some of it you need to enact and repeal and amend existing legislation, but we have to do them. And my view is that Nigeria does not even need maybe more than 100 to 150 MBAs. We currently have more than 800. What are those agencies doing? So apart from the fact that there are also avenues for wastage and high overhead of running government, they also come in the way of doing business. Many of them, you find agencies that are duplicating roles. And just to get things out of government sometimes can be a nightmare and a big headache. So we need to do all of this. My view is that the report should be implemented as quickly as possible.
Will it be hard to implement now?
Of course, it will be hard to implement at any time. But I think that it will be, less hard, if there's any English like that, at this time, than it will be without the crisis. So I'm saying that we need to take advantage of this crisis to make a tough decision, which in any case will still be tough, but will be tougher without the crisis.
You made mention earlier about corruption, because even the monies we are getting right now, how do we ensure that it doesn't still filter away to private pockets of a few Nigerians? And they may not even be found out, and they would, frolic with those monies, our money, public money. So how do we ensure that what government is even spending, if you take a look at even what's been happening since over palliatives, I don't even know how much we spent right now on palliatives, so I can tell you that. And some amount of monies we've spent even fighting this COVID. I don't think they are keeping the receipts, or even if they are keeping it, we don't know how much of those monies have gone into all of that. So how do we ensure that this little money we have doesn't get filtered away?
Yeah, I'll say one very important thing in dealing with corruption, and even beyond dealing with corruption, in building trust between the people and the government, is accountability and transparency. And it's so easy to do. What do you need to do? Just publish what you do. I heard a lawmaker speak on TV a couple of days ago, and was speaking to the alleged corruption in, I think, Zamfara State, and said that there were states who had signed contracts with Chinese companies, and those contracts were signed in Mandarin, in Chinese language, no English version. Now, imagine someone who put their signature in Chinese language. How much of that did they even understand? Or were they even concerned about it? We had the issue of P&ID that had not gone away. So we need to get to a point where we commit to transparency and accountability by disclosing what we do in full, publish them, put on the website, put it in the press, say it in the media, let people know. That serves as a way of control. A lot of the improvements we've had so far in terms of the budgeting process and the budget has been that the level of transparency and disclosure has been a little bit more than it used to be in the past. Then the other important thing is to have structures and institutions. So you have the TSA, you have the budgeting process, you have approval process. Let those processes work. Strengthen them, review them, harmonize them. The ones that you need to automate them. Because once you automate, it's easy for us to do an audit, and it's more difficult to steal money. Those would be my own recommendations.
How difficult will it be for the government across board, both federal and state governments, to get money from businesses within the economy, even as we reopen gradually? If you take a look at MSMEs, 41.6 million MSMEs in Nigeria, 41.5 million of them are micro, not even small, are micro businesses. We saw what happened in January as the president put pen to paper to sign the Finance Act. So MSMEs, for example, provide 96% of businesses, 84% of employment. They are 48% of the national GDP. How does government get revenue from this fraction of businesses, vis-a-vis also big businesses that are struggling? If you take a look at, for example, Aliko Dangote is the richest man. His net worth has dropped, definitely. His company would also be struggling at this point with other big companies. So how where should balance come from? Would there be anything like balance at this time? Because all the businesses are facing a crisis right now.
Yeah, I like this question. So I think the first point, because I think this is one area where policymakers and government in Nigeria, in my view, always get it wrong. So these 41.5 million micro businesses are not the businesses, they are not the people we should target for revenue generation. So every time I hear government say, informal sector, how can we make it? We are not supposed to make money from them. And it's not very different from other countries. So what tends to happen, again, going back to data, if you have quality data about who is doing what business and in what sector and all of that, you find that in many countries, the top 1% of businesses contribute about 90 to 95% of government revenue. So I'm not saying you should kill those top 1%, but you need to design your tax system and revenue raising system in such that you have data about who is doing what, and you make sure that they pay the right amount of taxes as at when due, without creating some people who are above the laws or some individuals or organizations. Now, having said that, government, I'm not saying you shouldn't make any money at all from MSME. I'm saying it's not going to move the needle for you. But the biggest problem they have is that the multiple taxation we have in Nigeria affect those MSMEs disproportionately. So they're actually the one that carry the most of the burden because, one, they are not usually very financially aware, so they don't know their rights to be able to push back, and then people take advantage of them and people keep showing up almost every day. Government can officially repeal all those tax laws that do not make a lot of sense, not making money for government, only enriching the pockets of corrupt people, repeal them and limit the taxes they have to pay to maybe a few, maybe 3, maybe 4. Publicize them and educate them and let them pay using technology, either on their mobile phone, bank transfer, or what have you. So once you do that, you make some money from the MSME, but then you focus on the medium size and the large firms to make sure they pay their taxes as at when due. Review your incentives. Some of them were just giving money away without commensurate benefit to the economy. You need to correct all of that. And then the MDAs, you have over 100 MDAs that generate revenue, and they are spending the money. They are not sending the money to TSA. You have to stop that. Let them send their money to the Federation account through the TSA, and let them file their own budget through the budgeting process. By the time you combine all of this together, you begin to see some improvement. We are talking about budget revision now. It's mostly at the federal government. The states are not even talking about it, whereas they are equally affected. So we need to have this framework for looking at how we raise revenue and spend them efficiently.
Yes, you just took me to the other point, which I was about to make, talking about the states, because it seems that so much attention is placed on the center. We've seen a revision of the national budget. How many states are facing bankruptcy right now? Because I know that COVID-19 pandemic is what is on the lips of most, if not all, the governors in Nigeria. But I haven't seen, strategic planning coming in from some state governors as it regards revenue profiles for their states, even as we battle this pandemic. So how many states are facing bankruptcy right now? Even Lagos, that has so much IGR that we think can survive on its own Nigeria. Lagos State's economy is also being threatened right now. Akwa Ibom State slashed its, I think, its budget by 40%, thereabout. So how many states are facing insolvency right now? That's something we need to talk about, even if they don't like it.
Yeah, indeed. I think maybe we can even ask that question and say how many states are not facing bankruptcy and insolvency. Unfortunately, states can't print money, so which means technically a state can be bankrupt. If you think about it from the helicopter view, in 2019, all the states generated about 1.3 trillion internal IGR, internally generated revenue. And they share around 2.5, 2.6 trillion from FARC. I think any governor who is being sincere with themselves at this time should assume that the money that will come from the Federation account for the rest of the fiscal year would almost be next to zero. So you need to zero down and say, well, maybe nothing will come from federation account. You still continue to get a little bit here and there from sharing of VAT, because VAT, no matter what, you still get something from that. And then, of course, from CIT and the other revenues that will be shared. So you need to bring down your expectations significantly. Then for IGR, again, you need to expect that the IGR in 2020 will be less than in 2019 because people are losing employment. They can't pay PAYE. But when you put all of this together, you need to then compare that with your recurrent expenditure and your debt service obligations. So the two priorities for any any government to continue to operate is you must be able to meet your debt obligations and you must be able to meet your recurrent expenditure. They then have to reevaluate. Is there any way I can defer my debt? Can I have a rescheduling? Can I do a refinancing? Can I renegotiate the terms? You take the debt out of the way, at least for this year. And then you move on to recurrent expenditure. Are there things there that we don't have to? Can we delay them? Can we reduce them? Can we eliminate them completely? So that you focus on ones that are your priority. And one of that has to be the salary cost. I know also for many of them, they have issues of ghost workers. You say you're paying 10,000, but indeed, they're actually effectively less than 5,000. This is the time to look at those things critically. Otherwise, many of the states will struggle to survive, and maybe the federal government will bail them out ultimately.
Federal government that doesn't have money, but whether federal government will go print is true. Federal government that is in debt, states also are in debt. I think states in Nigeria collective debt is about 23.5 or 6 billion dollars. The state, the vulnerability right now is there. Is there any state for you that can raise its head above waters? All of them will be inside, including Lagos.
No, I think Lagos will be fine. Lagos will still be able to generate IGR that can cover its overhead as well as debt obligations. So Lagos State will be fine, no matter how you look at this play out. But for the other states, it will be tough. Maybe you can say, Ogun, FCT, maybe Rivers. But even all of that, it will be a tough thing to do. But ultimately, the point is because they cannot print money, if they do all of these things we're saying, it doesn't even mean that will be sufficient to carry them through. So they still have to rely on the federal government. The advantage the federal government has is federal government can borrow even more. Federal government can print Naira, even though it's not encouraged at this time. But then, you want to get to a point where you still want to have a country. And then once you deal with the crisis, hopefully we would have learned from it and be able and become better managers of the economy post-COVID-19.
As we end this interview, let's talk about printing money. We've seen what has happened even in the United States. It's called helicopter money, not just in the United States, but in other economies across the world. Can we afford to go printing, even though we've printed some? Can we still print more? And what are the vulnerabilities for the Naira? Bearing in mind, if you take a look at what is in the United States, they are printing and they are printing money, but the dollar is the reserve currency, so they can afford to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually the point. So the US, because the US dollar is a reserve currency, you have the opportunity to print as much money as you want, because what tends to happen is, you print more money and the whole world suffers for it, not only the US, because a lot of reserves are in USD. That is not the case for Naira. So which means we cannot just print Naira. We saw what happened in Zimbabwe during the times of Mugabe. Just kept printing, and then it got to a point where 100 trillion was barely enough to buy a loaf of bread in Zimbabwe. We don't want to get to that point. Because if we keep printing without commensurate increase in the value of goods and services, in other words, productivity and production, then the value of the money you have will fall. You will just have wasted money in printing notes that adds no value to the economy.
Okay.
So we should be mindful of that and then think about other options before coming to that as a last resort.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Oyedele, for giving us your perspectives this morning. I wish you a lovely day. Continue to keep safe, just just like I will continue to keep safe. I've been speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, who is the West Africa tax leader for PricewaterhouseCoopers. We've been looking at the revenue options for government. I'm handing you over to Ifeanyi Nwobi in the news studio right now to give us an update on AIT reports as regards what's happening. I will see you all on Wednesday because the town hall, the virtual town hall forum is taking place tomorrow. So I'll see you all on COVID-19 Watch on Wednesday. Hello, Ifeanyi.
Hi, Nancy.
How are you doing? We are broke, oh. Nigeria is broke. I hope you are not broke.
It can only get better. We're hopeful.